you cannot. So I'll go ahead and I'll pass it over to Carol.
Thank you, Marlon. Just a recap from part one. As we've said, this is part two of a series on the triangulum. When we say triangulum, we are referring to vapes, tobacco or cigarettes, and other tobacco products, and marijuana. So just a recap from part one, as you can see on your screen, we have presented the triangulum as a framework for understanding product use, the collective impact and harm of these products, especially on youth, and the policies, regulations that protect the youth and communities from the harmful effects of the triangulum of tobacco, vapes, and marijuana. So in terms of product use, data have established that vapes or the devices brings greater likelihood, especially for youth and young adults, either to use cigarettes or tobacco or marijuana. Okay. In terms of the collective impact, the emphasis was made on brain development, and this applies to, especially to youth and young adult. Brain doesn't reach full development up to the age of 25 years. So within those years involves a period of intense construction of the brain centers and the neurons. And again, researchers would establish that use of tobacco, vapes, and marijuana would stunt brain development and would lead to either temporary or permanent damage to the brain. Not only is the brain involved here, but also the lungs. We have heard of electronic vaping associated lung illness or EVALI, okay, as well as on impairment of vessel function or blood vessel function. And lastly, we touched on the policies, rules, regulations, especially in the state of California, where tobacco and marijuana laws overlap. And the most important of these policies are in the areas where all vaping devices are considered to be tobacco products, as well as emissions from vaping devices are subject to the same restrictions on secondhand exposure as tobacco smoke. And lastly, it's on the minimum age of purchase of tobacco products and vapes. Okay. It's 21 years, so no one under the age of 21 should get hold of tobacco and vape. In terms of marijuana products, we talk about the laws would focus on possession of marijuana products. Still, no one under the age of 21 by law is allowed to possess marijuana products. So those three areas, product use, collective impact on health, policies, are the main points of discussion from part one. So part two, we move on to community conversation. How do you see the triangulum operate? Or how does community experience with the triangulum is captured, okay, by our resource person and our guests for this afternoon. And so we have two of our community organizers, seasoned community organizers, assigned in Gardena and El Segundo to discuss what it's like to be in the community and what the experience is like with respect to the Triangulum in the city of El Segundo and Gardena. So I'll pass it on to first Tiffany Tan, our community organizer in El Segundo, for her segment on community conversations on the Triangulum with special focus in the city of El Segundo. Take it away, Tiffany.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you for that lovely introduction. And thank you, Marlon, for your help too. So now we are going into the community conversation. And these are in short words, these are the stories. Carol had talked about the intersecting concerns of these 3 devices, and now we're bringing into personal stories in El Segundo, and we'll share more on personal stories and insights from Gardena. So this is now our city spotlight. And before I introduce more of the work that we do, I also want to introduce El Segundo's community conversation, Joye Harris. She is a big fan of the Dodgers, and I got to know her more through our works. She's a big fan of the Dodgers. She's also a fan and part of the El Segundo bowling. And so I got to get to know her mainly through ROAD, which is Reach Out Against Drugs. This is the El Segundo citywide coalition members. And I got to know her as treasurer, but also as a mother, also as a colleague, friend, and a leader in El Segundo. And in our work in El Segundo, we are working on the tobacco policy. And in other words, I got to know her, and she shared candidly her experiences as a resident in El Segundo, in particular to just her day-to-day life, what she's observed. And when it came up to come to gather and mobilize and do a public comment at El Segundo City Council on the 7th, she was on board, and she got to share her experiences, let alone her concerns about what's going on in El Segundo and her concerns for a call to action. So before we go into a question and answer and meet the lovely Joye and her concerns for change and the youth health youth concerns, I wanted to share a soundbite from her public comment in which she spoke in person at City Council. And so for here, take a great listen.
Okay, please, thank you. Okay. Hello, Mr. Mayor, council members, and any audiences here. My name is Joye Harris. I'm a resident and have been since 1974. I also worked in El Segundo from 74 until I retired. I'm treasurer of ROAD, Reach Out Against Drugs, whose mission is prevention of tobacco and alcohol use for teenagers. This also includes e-cigarettes and vaping. As Tiffany just pointed out, youth nicotine use can lead to addiction and can harm the developing brain, impacting learning, memory, and attention. Our community can help stem the use growth in El Segundo, and it has grown, oh my goodness, by prohibiting the sale of flavored tobacco products, including e-cigarettes. Scientific studies have shown that because of its sensory effects, flavor may enhance the attractiveness of tobacco products. They lure teenagers by masking the taste and the smell of nicotine. Nearly all tobacco product use begins in adolescence. Often this leads to use of other drugs to get a stronger high. It is imperative that we do as much as we can in our community to curb the rising use in adolescence. Currently, there's a group going door to door to get signatures for a cannabis dispensary in El Segundo. ROAD and I urge you to prevent this from happening. I watched a neighbor grow up. He started with tobacco at a young age, even though his parents do not smoke. He advanced to marijuana and then on to much stronger drugs. On one occasion, my husband talked him out of his threat to kill his parents and on another occasion, his threat of suicide. He has gone through rehab a couple of times, never finishing. Today, he's in his early 30s. He still uses, is unable to work, and his actions are not trustworthy around neighbors and what friends he has left. He could erupt with anger at any time. The city of El Segundo has a mission statement, which reads, "Our mission is to provide a safe and secure community while treating all people with dignity and respect." As a member of ROAD, and as a member of the community of El Segundo, I urge you to consider extending the tobacco ordinance with a flavor ban on tobacco products. And also consider the prevention of a cannabis dispensary, in our city. Follow the science that strongly shows brain damage from drug use in the young. Follow the survey taken in El Segundo, wanting an enhanced tobacco ordinance and a ban of a cannabis dispensary for our town. That will provide a safer and more secure community. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mrs. Harris.
All right. Thank you so much for listening to that, and hope you could follow along. So with that, I'd like to stop sharing and just kind of do a gallery view of our question and answer. And so I had the chance to work more in depth with Joyce. I met her through Reach Out Against Drug, and she was actually one of my first contacts when I started working in El Segundo. So Joyce, first and foremost, thank you so much for joining in today's at Hot Topic Tuesday.
You're welcome. I'm happy to be here.
All right, and so Joyce, I remember when we were talking about this, and I wanted you to share your concerns. You had 3 minutes, and I remember you said you wanted to sound pissy but polite, and you definitely did.
Okay. I was pretty nervous. At least I don't have to have a mask for a Zoom.
That's right. So Joyce, now when we think about the triangulum with vaping, with tobacco, cigarettes, and with e-cig, and with now marijuana, these are 3 devices and they all meet intersectively. May I ask, what do you see and you've noticed in your community in El Segundo?
Well, first of all, I've noticed the overt use of vaping by teenagers. It's not like they're even trying to hide it. I see them, driving sometimes, and, they're walking with friends. Sometimes, I don't know recently, but I have seen them in the past before COVID, and they were sharing. I hope they've quit vaping, but at least stop sharing, one of the e-cigarettes. That's COVID is another danger that we have. But it's so bad in the even middle school that they've put in vaping detectors in the lavatories, in the bathrooms. And I don't know about the high school, but I know that they have done it in the middle school. And these detectors have cameras so they can see who went in and out, right before the beeper went off or whatever, and they were alerted. So they have, hopefully that's slowed down. Certainly it did when there was no school, but I don't know how it is now that school has come back again. Interesting, just an aside, my daughter is a librarian, and some of the parents were worried about the masks. She says the kids are really good about the masks. They're so happy to be with their friends that they don't worry about the masks anymore at all. I've also seen someone at the park. My sister visited recently, and she goes walking every day, so I thought I'd go with her. I don't walk very well. And so I was looking for a bench. Well, she and I were at the far end of the park, and in the middle of the park was a bench. However, a youngster came to sit down, and we were looking at him, and I saw a cloud of smoke coming out. Well, it wasn't cigarette. He was vaping. And so I
And
kept looking at him and he looked at me and he stopped, but he didn't move. So maybe he thought I was going to go away or arrest him or something. I don't know. But as we came closer and reached him, I said, you know, that's going to fry your brain. How come you're doing this? Well, his answer was, I play the sax and this helps my breath. And I'm going, well, maybe there's another way you could get your breath up, maybe running or some kind of exercises or something that you can, you know, get better on the breath without, you know, frying your brain. Well, he knew that things were a problem, but he was doing it anyway. He asked me if I ever smoked. And I said no. And he said never. And I said no. It reminded me of my brother who used to smoke marijuana, who said, you know, if you never tried it, how can you say? Well, I know because I believe the scientific studies that it's harmful. I don't have to stick a knife in my stomach to know that that's going to harm me and that it's going to hurt. Okay, so those are my reasons. I wish I could get across to him that the things you talked about in the first session apparently is how harmful it is to the, you know, to a young person because they're still growing. They have lots of anxieties. And if you start masking your anxiety with nicotine or some other substance, you're not going to resolve it. You won't have any conflict resolution. You're really not going to address your anxiety because the next time you are anxious again, you're going to vape or smoke or something else. And you're still not going to solve any of your problems that you're having. In fact, it sort of makes it worse. Again, I believe in the scientific studies. We don't need to stick a knife in the stomach. We don't need to do that. I've also noticed, I guess I said this from my car as I was driving around, some teenagers were studying. And I talked about my neighbor in that little recap that you had. But the other thing I didn't mention in it was that he needed apparently to get money to buy the drugs. So at some point he stole money from his mother's jewelry and went to hawk it or pawn it and try to get money from that. The policeman told me about that. I mentioned it to the neighbor who said, oh yes, they were just trinkets, denying it. I mean, denied that he stole it. And then he said, well, just between you and me, she said, yeah, he did. He took them. When does it stop? How come? And truly, I feel that the parents had a lot to do with it because they didn't rein him in. They didn't identify the problem and give him a timeout, give him a punishment and stick to it. They would threaten, but then the next day it would all be gone. So, you know, this life continued and he's now in his 30s and he can't keep a job. So this is where it goes. He went on to much harder things. And that's the other problem with this triangulum. It's not just the cigarettes that can harm you, certainly, but then you go on to much stronger stuff. And that's what really is what's bad, really, really bad. I guess that's about it.
Guys, thank you for just sharing and your experience. I've heard this before when we spoke, and one thing that pops in my mind, especially when you bring it back to the beginning of your experience of walking at the park, and there was a young gentleman who was smoking, or possibly even vaping, and they felt that it was going to increase their lung capacity for their instrument. To me, I felt that it might be not necessarily not only just a lack of misinformation, but perhaps even the low perception of harm, that the individual felt that this is going to help them breathe long, breathe higher in order to play that instrument that includes lung capacity. And it's a little bit of irony, but I think it also just highlights that there's this low perception of harm that this device can help this individual in maybe a hobby that they're interested, or maybe even an interest that they like to do. But in actuality, it's contradicting, and let alone going into the health harms, that it's really just air that should go into the lungs versus aerosol versus these flavors.
I suggested that he try something else. I said, well, maybe running. And he said, well, I used to be heavier and I ran and I lost weight. Duh. I mean, that didn't answer the question. Okay. Try something else, other kind of exercises. There's got to be something that you don't, that is not going to be so harmful to you.
And then I wanted to also bring about your public comment, and you and I shared and talked about this, the individual, your neighbor. As the side-by-side neighbor, you've seen him grow up and you've seen him take this unfortunate path. And I think from when I hear you share your experience, like this sense of maybe heart tug is his quality of life, the potential of his quality of life. What could he have accomplished, let alone how could he have really enjoyed his life, let alone maybe the different things that he would have accomplished. Unfortunately, it was, he's taken this path of going into and starting into with vaping, and unfortunately went on to harder drugs. And I think for you, when you share this, I see that there's that sense of maybe sadness in regards to his quality of life, that potential of life, of what he could have done. And it takes a toll, especially you being the neighbor and you seeing the police reports or just police activity.
Oh, yes. The
Yeah.
police know our street.
Yeah. Now, Joyce, and you mentioned that there's issues that the youth are facing. Predominantly, you've experienced and you've shared that in the high schoolers, and possibly, pardon me, in the middle school, there is also these smoking and vaping devices to detect the flavors. I've heard of this, and this is true as well. It's interesting because it's the flavors, and we've mentioned this in part 1, and this has also been a component to the Triangulum, that it's the flavors that attract. And I was able to speak with the acting principal at that time, who informed me, and he said that it was the flavors that attracted more to the young ladies, especially when it's the strawberry smell, it's the blueberry smell. They were more feminine, and it unfortunately attracted them. And when I think about when I was in middle school, like I loved like the strawberry flavored lip glosses, and maybe even the banana smelling. It attracted me. So I thought that was more of like, these young girls who have so much potential, and unfortunately they're getting curious about it because of the targeting of the marketing. Yeah. Now, what would you say, Joyce, and you mentioned in your experience as road, your treasurer, and your own day-to-day experiences, and I thank you so much for showcasing your experience at the council, in front of the council, and they were receptive. And I'd like to report that this public comment, as non-agendized, will be returning back. And so that's one of our hopes by the end of the year. And so thank you, Joyce, for that help, and let alone just your leadership in making a public comment. What other ways, what other action steps that the community can take in regard to this issue? What would you say?
First of all, I think if we get this tobacco ordinance passed, that would be good. I noticed that Gardena doesn't have it passed either. I'm hoping that you're working on it. Those of you in the audience are working on it there. El Segundo doesn't have it, but there's 108 communities or counties within California that already have this passed. Okay, some of them are very close neighbors here. So I think that the ban on it, so they can't get it here. Unfortunately, I think that, or at least I've read, that a lot of teenagers get it online. So they get the vaping online. I'm not sure how that works. I don't think it's legal, but they still get it. So I don't know. I think that parents have a lot to do with it. There's so much peer pressure and between the youth, but but if they keep repeating how harmful it is, you know, and you don't want it, the neighbor next to the one who has already abused nicotine and other things way beyond, have had young children, and they heard screaming and they heard whatever, and they said, see this? Okay, if you ever start doing drugs, you're out. This is not going to happen to us. You're going to be out. So at least the kids are aware of it. I'm sure they probably would get them help rather than just kick them out, but they're at least aware of how strong they feel against this. So that part is good. Again, they can repeat the harmfulness of the tobacco products. And I heard one girl say, one teenager say, I learned I could die from fungus in the lungs for vaping. No way do I want to do that. That's great. That's what you want to hear. No way do I do that because it can hurt me. The other thing is, I think if we can develop confidence in the use, then they have that ability to reject what their peers are doing or even guide them in the right direction rather than follow them in the wrong direction. I think that would be very good. They can be, you know, you can do this in sport activities. You can do it in band, you know, musical abilities, dance, some sort of music. There's other ways that you can expend your energies, okay, where you don't have so much anxiety, hopefully, and you can then find other means to do it. Just remind them that their body is still growing. It's developing, it's changing. The hormones are raging. There's body growth. Sometimes, you know, there's like 6 inches in a year or something. And certainly the brain is also developing. So the part of the brain that maybe is making critical decisions. I'm happy to see that in the schools, they're doing things that promote critical thinking. So they have some courseware that, you know, you have, for instance, critical thinking and sorry,
No problem.
nobody else is here. Okay. Goodbye, whoever it is. Anyway, so I think that they're going ahead with those. We have in the past with Road had confidence building courses. Sometimes it was the band that took it. Sometimes it was the football team, so that they could build up this same confidence and use it in ways that they don't have to follow peers. There's counselors that are available at the schools. There's also organizations. Okay, one of them is your organization, so certainly trying their hardest, but South Bay Family Connected has avenues, and Road subscribes to it so that you can go to their website and find information. Again, the parents, to prevent it, please don't allow the cannabis dispensary to be in El Segundo. I believe that our council members are not in favor of it, even though they would like the money for the revenue from it, but they're still going around. They were at the fair trying to get people to sign the petition. They come door to door. I got another flyer on my door. So they're trying their hardest. So when this comes up, or if it comes up, I hope they don't get enough signatures. But if it comes up, I hope that there's a strong enough push that it will not pass. That's what we can do to at least keep it out. Okay.
Right. Thank you, Joyce. And I hear like these two reoccurring pairs, partnerships. It's peers and it's the parents. they are who are behind the community. They are the ones, it's the household, let alone it's also the friendship at the school sites, or, in regards to sports. And I think when you mentioned that it's the parents that, need to have this level of strictness, but also let alone an honest conversation with the peers, with their children, no matter how age, when appropriate, bring that topic up, because we're talking about your backyard, we're talking about El Segundo, we're talking about Gardena. So it's going to affect your communities. And when we think about El Segundo, much like every other city, the youth is at stake. The youth health concerns, they're the ones who everyone has that heart tug for. And I thought that was well summarized by what you mentioned in regards to what the community can do, and let alone, Joyce, what you've been doing with Road, representing Road, but also representing yourself as a resident, as a longtime resident, and also sharing why this is concerning for you and that it's very concerning for all of El Segundo. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Joyce. Now I just want to really quickly switch cities and hop over to one of our neighboring cities, to Gardena for this second half. And so with that, Joyce, we won't say bye yet, and we'll continue this discussion, but we'll pass it over to Gardena, and I'd like to pass it over to Jessica.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Joyce.
Perfect. Thank you, Ms. Tiffany Tan, and thank you, Ms. Joye Harris, for sharing your personal insights and stories around substance abuse in El Segundo, specifically around tobacco, e-cigarettes, and marijuana. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce myself again. My name is Jessica Baya, and I am a community organizer out in the city of Gardena. And we will have our very special guest, Mr. Detective Sterling Kim, and he has 20 years of experience in the city of Gardena. He is with GJIP, Gardena Juvenile Justice Intervention Program, and also a longtime member of GAADAP, which is our adult coalition in Gardena, which is Gardena Drug and Alcohol Abuse Prevention Task Force. So, Miss Tiffany, if we could take this screen down so we can have sort of a conversation. And so thank you, Detective Sterling Kim, for joining us. Similar to the set of questions in El Segundo, my first set of question is, what do you see and notice in the community of Gardena? What do you perceive to be the most urgent issue in regards to tobacco, e-cigarettes, and marijuana?
There I go. Am I unmuted now? Okay. The biggest issues is that marijuana use, tobacco use, and vape use is still rampant, especially among the youth. I can't really pin it down to one problem because the problem is legion. I mean, we can pinpoint one part of the spider web and just find that there's connections all over the place. I mean, access. Joyce, oh, by the way, Joyce, thank you so very much. It's awesome to hear your story. You're inspired. You're an inspiration. Thank you so much for your good work. I know one of the things Joyce did mention was the online sales. So accessibility is huge. There's no regulation for online sales. And all a kid needs to do is find a credit card, whether it be from their own parents or even just log into their parents' account, or an older brother, older sister, cousin, nephew, cousin, uncle, whatever, and whatever will just get mailed to them, or to a friend's house or whatever. So there's absolutely zero regulation. But besides that, there's kids that are dealing these items to each other anyway on campus. So the people that are making these illicit, the black market copies, I mean, I've done stings on in hotel rooms when we go in and we see that they've got literally hundreds of modified casings that they're trying to change the batteries on so that they'll be hotter so they can smoke more than just the marijuana, so it'll actually burn like meth or crack or whatever. So the accessibility to that is there's no regulation on that. Accessibility from another point, the stores. So we are still in the midst of a huge pandemic that is, we haven't even begun to feel the first ripples of the economic implications of what's going on. So you've got small businesses that need to make a dime so they can pay their rent and pay their own mortgages, and they'll take the money from wherever they can. So if they're willing to sell these e-cigarettes to the kids that come by, much like the way kids used to do back in the day with the liquor stores, find someone, give them the money, he'll just go in and buy them for them. That's a difficult situation to regulate also. And the spider web grows. So let's stay on this whole accessibility thing. Marketing. Many people we speak to say they use the vapes because there's this inherent belief that it's less dangerous, and you don't have to worry about the tar content of a vape pen or an e-cigarette. So that narrative has gone out, and that's been widely accepted, despite the science that goes against it. Hold on to that thought, the science, by the way. I want to address that too. So the marketing, you've got celebrities that are doing it. I don't know how we're going to fight that. And you've got the flavors and all of that. So all these numerous factors going around is creating an incredible increase, and the ease of access is also contributing to that. One other point on accessibility. So as I've stated before, we are in the midst of a pandemic, and many people are suffering economically in terms of not having jobs or even just coping with the stresses of the day. So parents are a source of accessibility to the youth that we face. So we're telling them how this is bad, and they're like, well, mom and dad are smoking in the living room every night. So what are you talking about? So what we tell them kind of falls is jarring to the youth, and somehow kind of falls on deaf ears. And then that also causes all other issues in terms of parenting, because now the parents are bringing their kids in and saying, I want you to fix this problem with my kids smoking weed, yet they've got a smoking dove in their ashtray in the car while they're driving. So that's another issue. So it's becoming, if it isn't already, it is already epidemic right now. I can say of all the youth that have been brought into my program, more than 90% have smoked cigarettes or marijuana at least once prior to entering the program.
Thank you, Detective Sterling Kim. You definitely seen and noticed quite a few different things in the city of Gardena. You talked about access and availability, marketing. I mean, these are all contributors to some of the issues why we still have issues around the triangulum with e-cigarettes, tobacco, and vapes. Another thing you mentioned was parents. It's so interesting you mentioned parents as sort of being that influence to use. I think any parents that is out there listening on Facebook, take this sort of Hot Topic Tuesday and even the previous one as information and education around, some of the health harms and health issues for using these different substances, vaping, tobacco, and marijuana. The youth brain, they're still developing up until the age of 25. So, I mean, that particular piece of information was very shocking. So thank you for sharing that, Sterling and Kim. For my next question, what are some of the issues you think the youth are facing in regards to tobacco, e-cigarettes, and marijuana?
So marketing is an indescribable pressure. You've got celebrities, you've got billboards, you've got commercials, you've got YouTube, TikTok, and social media. They are constantly bombarded, which kind of brings me to, I don't know, kind of a point I want to bring up later in terms of how we can combat this. So it's affecting and you know, the youth are under so much pressure. We've got these kids, this whole generation of kids that, you know, just came out of lockdown, and as hard as it was for the adults, just imagine how exponentially difficult it was for the kids to deal with this. So what would be the word that I would use? Coping mechanisms that are non-conducive to positive living, I think is what has developed in terms of facing the stresses of today. And honestly, this makes, I know old people, they always say older people say things like this, so I guess I'm going to now claim myself as being old. But the day and age today is just so much more toxic than I ever remember it being. This discussions of diversity seem, and it seems to be people are more segregated. Discussions about inclusivity and acceptance, but if you don't follow the ideal of everyone else, then you immediately become canceled. You know, so it's things like this. It's just the increased toxicity that's been going on in society in general, especially within the youth circles. I believe it's just creating this pressure that's just crushing these youth. And you know, they're not equipped with the adequate, or I don't know what to say, coping mechanisms to face this pressure. So what are you going to do? You're going to take the path of least resistance. And there's a substance that could take you to happy la la land for a while to forget. That's not too hard. So that's, I think, seems to be one of the directions that's pushing the youth in this direction, unfortunately.
Wow, thank you for sharing. You're right. With the youth today, there's definitely a lot of pressures, even as they're going back into the school settings and just getting comfortable with going back to school from, you know, remotely going to school. You're right. Fitting in is definitely one of the pressures that the youth are facing. And, you know, they tend to use substances like e-cigarettes, vaping as an outlet to kind of escape. And, you know, thank you for
Actually,
bringing.
I'm sorry, Jessica. There's actually one other point that's also we've noticed that's coming up is, you know, we're entering this Me Too phase, which is, thank God for it. And I don't know why it was so late, honestly. But there's this offshoot of it that's just kind of just, I don't want to sound like I'm being anti-woke or anything like that. I don't want it to be misinterpreted, but you know, there's this female empowerment or feminism. There's this branch that's kind of taken it in a way in which a lot of the youth, the narrative given to the youth females is that you're empowered, whatever you want to do, and you can do whatever you want to do. And we've noticed that as a part of this, that alcohol use and substance use seems to be a lot more prevalent in females than it's been in the history. Generally, the history that we found in law enforcement, or that I found in my career, whenever I contacted females that had fallen into substance abuse, it's like, how did you get started into this? And I can tell you a majority of the time, it was I started because of my boyfriend. You know, now it's a lot more, no, I'm claiming I want to party and I'm going to do what I want to do and I'm going to do this. And it's, while the empowerment portion of it is something I absolutely agree with it, but the decision to take the path to self-destruction as part of that empowerment is also creating another problem, another issue.
Well, you mentioned something very important, and I'd like to highlight it right now. And that is, oftentimes when you're introduced to e-cigarettes, vaping, marijuana, or you mentioned alcohol in this case, it's often introduced by someone you know. Your story, it was the boyfriend. In the previous discussion, it was a parent. Well, my parent vapes, so how are you going to tell me, what's good or not good? So I'd like to highlight that, not very many people might know this, but that first introduction of substance abuse is possibly due to someone personal influences. With this, I'd like to bring it to my last question, and that is, Detective Sterling Kim, please, with 20 years of experience with GJIP and a longtime member with GDAP, could you please let us know some action steps the community can take in regards to the issues of the Triangulum?
Whew. I want to try to be positive on the ending note. It felt like I brought a lot of doom and gloom, and I'm sorry about that. You know what we need? We need to get celebrity on our side. The science is there and it's irrefutable, but as we can see with like what's going across the nation with things like the vaccinations and masking and whatnot, science doesn't really seem to be as strong of an influence as we would want it to be. We need some more flash. We need some more bling. We need to get the celebrities on our side, sponsoring us and lifting us up and giving us stories. While I am totally, anyways, I don't like to sometimes bring my personal into it, but we need to make as much noise as the proponents are. It's marketing. We have to fight the market. We have to fight marketing with marketing. The science is not enough. It's not enough. What we need to do is make the noise to catch their attention and then insert the science is what I believe. And it might be controversial for me to say that, but honestly, especially with the way that there's the decriminalization of substance abuse, the decriminalization of all juvenile crime. There's no prosecution on juvenile crimes at this time, so there's no consequence. That's what we need to do, or we need to start convincing the community to really vote with an understanding of the people running, whether they really are striving to serve the community, really scrutinize our political leaders that we're putting in.
Thank you, Sterling Kim. I love that. Fight marketing with marketing. So everyone on Facebook, please tag your favorite celebrity so they can join forces. Absolutely. And support the fight against substance abuse and protect our youth. With that, thank you, Sterling Kim, for your conversations today. I do have a special video that I'd like to launch. If Tiffany, you could launch that for us. And it is a special message from Council Member Paulette Francis. Thank you, Council Member Paulette Francis. And Tiffany, if you may play that. I think the sound is not working.
All right, let me get 1 second and we'll restart it.
Hello there. My name is Paulette Francis, and I'm council member for the city of Gardena. I'm also a public school teacher. And I believe in the rights of every adult to make their own choices with the minimum amount of intrusion from the government. However, the government does have the responsibility of making sure that the public is not deceived, falsely manipulated, or abused, especially when it comes to our children. And Big Tobacco was doing just that. They were spending millions of dollars to manipulate and mislead our children into consuming chemicals known to cause cancer that can lead to death. They have reinvented smoking by creating a new cigarette that's easily hidden in plain sight called the e-cigarette. They had even invented a new word for smoking. They call it vaping. Despite its similarity to vampires, vaping vampires, but I digress. Their crafty marketing ploys of packing their product to interest, entice, and engulf our children into consuming chemicals that are harmful to their minds and therefore the future. It's working. To disguise the taste until one becomes addicted to the tar or nicotine, they coat their poison with sugar and variety of kid-friendly flavors like cotton candy, banana split, Candy Crush, Kool-Aid, or Rocket Pop, just to name a few. Even worse, these new e-cigarettes contain more nicotine than regular cigarettes, causing them to be twice as addictive. They've also joined forces with TikTok, video games, WhatsApp app, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And they're all working overtime to convince our young people that consuming the chemically laced products is cool. That's what's happening. All these groups are spending a lot of money to shape their attitudes, thoughts, and influence the desires of the young people. They don't do it to improve their lives, but to get them addicted to their product and increase their products at the expense of the future of our young people. That's why it's up to us, the adults, to do all that we can to talk to our young people about the importance of living a healthy lifestyle, making smart choices, avoiding vaping, smoking in any form, whether it's marijuana, regular cigarettes, the little twisted cigars, or vaping. Back in the day, when I was coming along, our parents taught us to do as I say, not as I do. But this generation, they don't accept that idea. They're not going for it. That's why it's so important for us to live as an example. Nelson Mandela said that there can be no keener revelation of a society's soul than the way in which it treats its children. So I hope that members of the Gardena City Council will agree that we must fight the fight for the mind and well-being of our children. And when opportunity comes, we will vote to ban these products that have no beneficial value to our city, to our businesses, to our families, and certainly not to our children.
With that, it brings to a close conversations from the community of Gardena. Thank you, Councilmember Paulette Francis, for this beautiful message. And I guess at this time we can open it up to question and comments. If anybody has any questions or comments, please feel free to use the chat box or feel free to unmute yourself. And, you know, we're all family. We can all just sort of have a nice family discussion and conversation.
Right, as I saw in the chat, Detective Kim says we are family. Absolutely. So this can be for any of our public, our guest speakers, whether it's Joye Harris with El Segundo, or even with Officer Kim for.
Oh yeah, I like that.
Mhm, yeah. And Joyce, if you also have any questions as well, feel free to chime in too.
Okay. I don't have any questions though.
We do have a comment. It is great information. Thank you so much. Thank you, Gracie, for joining us today. Don't be shy if you have any questions for us. Now is your chance to ask. Well, it looks like Tiffany, we could probably, we have a couple more comments. which is, I really enjoyed today's discussion, always informative. Thank you, Rahima, and Francisco also agreed. We need a celebrity. Well, Francisco, please tag your favorite celebrity. Justin Bieber or, you know, whoever else. I just thought of Justin Bieber at the top of my head.
Be a believer.
Yeah, be a believer. Let's see. It seems like we could move on to the end of our Hot Topic Tuesday. Again, if you guys have any questions or comments, please feel free to reach out to either one of us. My name again is Jessica Baya. We have Tiffany Tan and El Segundo and Miss Carol Almeida also. So with that, I'll pass it back to you, Tiffany.
Thanks, Jessica. Overall, I feel that even though we are highlighting El Segundo and Gardena, based on our conversations today, based on just these 3 simple questions with our representative speakers, they shared common similarities regarding these devices, regarding the Triangulum, with tobacco, with e-cigarettes, also known as vaping now, let alone the next new word. And then with marijuana, there are so many interesting concerns. There's so many ways that your community can get involved, and there's so many steps, because when we're only highlighting 2 cities, more often than not, it's probably going to creep up in other cities as well, let alone this topic of how the youth are being affected. How much more can the parents and can the providers like ourselves be involved? So overall, I think this is just the beginning of this discussion. We are highlighting 2 cities, but all the more, this is really applicable for every other cities that you provide with, because there are youth that this is for the health of the youth, whether it's El Segundo or Gardena. I think this is very applicable with this Triangulum. Yeah. All right, just looking back on the comments, thank you everyone. And so with that, at exactly 5 o'clock, thank you so much for joining in on today's Hot Topic Tuesday of part 2. And thank you so much for your time and your comments about this. Thank you, Joyce, and
Go Dodgers.
and go. All right. And with that, I'd like to close Hot Topic Tuesday. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Bye. Have a great Tuesday afternoon. Go Dodgers, like Miss Joye Harris said.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Gracie.
And then I think for Richard, you can stop recording and Facebook Live.